Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, boy, and what a wonderful time of year. You know, the gardens are producing well, and we got lots of fresh food to eat. I've had some ripe tomatoes. They're a little slower.
Tomatoes are starting to come in. That's really nice. It's fun to see. Yeah. What else is coming in your garden?
Cucumbers, string beans are just starting. And again, my garden was late because it was late spring.
Yeah.
In many cases. And so I've been tempted to dig up some of the hills of potatoes, to get some of those fresh little type potatoes, but I haven't wanted to yet. And the onions are sizing up really, really nice. So things are looking pretty good considering it was a little later. But, and in addition to eating all these things fresh, we are so looking forward to pickling, and Mary always does canning. So we're looking forward to the pickling and canning season for us.
Yeah, so you brought in a guest this week, a return guest. We always like that when people come back. Why don't you introduce the listeners to who we got here?
Well, Rita Ussatis, the NDSU Extension Family and Community Wellness Agent for Cass County. And she is in the office right across the hall from me.
Is Don a good office mate? Does he?
He is great. I think our coworkers get mad because we just holler back and forth across the hall to each other, because sometimes I receive his questions and sometimes he receives my questions, because the caller in will say, I have a question about tomatoes. And so obviously it probably just goes to Don, but actually the question is, how do I preserve my tomatoes and not grow? Not grow.
Right. And intercoms are kind of a thing of the past, aren't they? And so, hollering across the hallway works just great for us.
You were saying the other people around you may get a little annoyed because you're always hollering. I got to think that between the two of you as gardeners, they got to love that occasionally there will be produce showing up.
We don't get as much in the office as we would think we do. We just get the questions from people. And so, one advantage once in a while, if I need a few extra tomatoes, I talk to my horticulturalists.
Yes, and I'm more than willing to share. And of course, it's always interesting to me because Reed has such a wealth of information on home canning, pickling, preserving foods. Now, Reed, how long have you been with Extension?
Oh, I'll be starting my 38th year.
And that's why Rita is a household name in much of the area.
How long have you been canning and pickling?
Well, I was just at my mom and dad's last week. I was on vacation and out in the garden, and we were talking about that. And I said, I think I started freezing peas and probably beans when I was about 8 or 9 years old, because I grew up with huge, huge gardens because I grew up on a farm, right? And that's what you did. You preserved all your vegetables and your produce for the winter. And Mom said that you probably did start when I was about 8 years old. So that's a long time ago. And I said, I remember sitting and shelling peas just to freeze peas. And that takes a lot of peas to freeze peas. And I also remember once when the corn was ready and my dad came home from the picking and he had a whole back end of the pickup full of corn to husk. So I actually sat outside under a tree all day and husked corn so we could freeze that corn. And so I've been doing this for a long time personally. And it goes back to my roots because that's what we did.
Yeah, well, sure. And shelling peas as a kid took a lot of patience.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you ate half of them because, they were so good.
Of course. Do you remember there was a way of shelling peas, the old Ringer washing machine? Did you ever hear that you could feed the pea shells through the Ringer washer?
And it wouldn't just squish them?
And supposedly they popped out. I only heard of that. I never heard of that.
Tried. We did have a Ringer washer when I was younger, but that was before I was even doing anything. So
yeah, that would have been fun. But the thing that I enjoy, and when I hear Rita get questions, oftentimes it's questions about the safe procedures on canning and pickling and things. And of course, Rita, that is so important, isn't it? Because you do hear some of these kind of offbeat, unsafe things. So I really appreciate the approach that you and NDSU Extension takes to home canning.
Well, and I think, too, that there's probably some people have a lot of apprehension if they haven't done it before. They're very nervous to do it because you hear these horror stories of food safety.
So I'll do my first warning message here. Is don't look at all the latest crazy ideas on the internet because there's so many unsafe methods out there, like canning in your oven, canning in the wash machine, canning in the dishwasher. canning in the microwave. Those are very unsafe procedures, and you could potentially, depends on what you're canning, kill people, right? So if you don't process the food correctly to make sure you destroy the enzymes or the bacteria that makes us sick, those foods are very dangerous. And so what we do in Extension is to try to make sure you have the safest product available that you're canning at home compared to commercial products. So sometimes our recommendations seem extreme, but what we're trying to do is make sure you have a safe food product in the end. And so we really want people not to go to the internet and find unsafe procedures. Go to the internet and find safe procedures from universities or research institutions and follow those procedures. The safe procedures are pressure canning of your beans, carrots, potatoes, corn, and you have to have the pressure with a high temp in time to kill the potential botulism in those products. So you need to have that in pressure canning, or you can freeze them. Another safe alternative, and a lot of people are scared of the pressure canner, and you don't need to be, but they are. But another safe procedure is the freezing of that. And then like your jams and jellies and fruit products, pickles, tomatoes, you can safely hot water bath them. But there also, you have to have a concern here that you have to add acid to like your pickles and your tomatoes to make sure you have enough acid in them to make them safe to kill the botulism or the bacteria, to safely hot water bath them. And that's a simple process. For tomatoes, it's adding a half a teaspoon of citric acid or 2 tablespoons of lemon juice per quart. And so you simply put them in the product, and then you have enough acid. And people say, well, why do we need to do that? Well, because tomatoes, there's like 100, how many varieties of tomatoes out there, Don, now?
15,000.
15,000. So every variety has a different acidic level.
Right.
And so what I grow in Fargo, or what my parents grow an hour away from here, the soil types are different. The pHs are different. So we could produce the same variety of tomatoes, but the acidic level will be different. So that's why we want you to add acid to your tomato products, just to make sure that that's a safe acidic level to process them with a hot water bath. Again, you can freeze tomatoes just as well. You can't freeze cucumbers for pickles.
That'd be pretty gross
pretty hard.
once you thaw them out. Yeah.
So the acidic that you're adding to your pickles is the vinegar.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure you're using the right percentage of acidic vinegar. So when you're shopping for your vinegar, you want a 5% acidic level.
Can you give us an example? I mean, not to name brand names or anything like that, but anything to look for. I mean, is there something on the front of the label that you would look for,
right on the front of the label of any vinegar, it will tell you if it's a 4% acidic or 5% acidic or 1% acidic. So it's right on the front label.
So you don't have to look at the back and the fine print and the small.
It's on the front of all the labels. So you just got to look. I mean, you would think there's a brand name out there, which I'm not going to say, that you would think would be a 5% vinegar. However, they have designed a pickling vinegar with the spices and everything already included, and it's not a 5% vinegar.
Really?
Yeah. So we're right now, that's on the market. I haven't really seen it around here, but it might be out there on the internet. So you don't want that vinegar. So just make sure you're using a 5%. We also want like a white vinegar that makes a nicer, clearer
kind of presentation
and a liquid in your product. So that's the acidic you add to your cucumbers. And so one of my favorite questions of the year is, they always say, my cucumbers are soft. What did I do wrong? Well, I always start with, well, what did you plant for cucumbers? And they go, well, I don't know. So if you bought a slicing variety cucumber, they're not going to be a pickle.
Right.
And you're going to have a soft pickle. And you probably have a cloudy liquid. You want to make sure if you're doing cucumbers, you actually planted a pickling variety.
Yep, that's exactly why the plant breeders developed pickling types. And so when a person looks at seed catalogs, they're divided into slicers and picklers.
Okay.
And because definitely, as you say, Rita, certain cucumbers just will turn mushy if pickled. Others maintain their rigidity.
Yeah. And so even if you're going to the farmer's market and you're buying cucumbers, make sure you're buying a pickling one if you want pickles, or a slicing one if you just want to eat them. And so, 2 weeks ago, I was also home, and our cucumbers were ready at home. And we actually had a burpless variety of cucumber, and people say, can you use burpless varieties for pickling? Yeah, they make great refrigerator pickles.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is you just make them and they store in the refrigerator. You don't put them in a jar and process them and put them on a shelf.
Yeah, so with refrigerator pickles, just to draw that out, like what you don't need the acid, you don't need anything like that. Actually, you want more sugar in that.
Well, actually, you still have vinegar in it. You still make a brine with sugar and vinegar and spices. So you still need the acid, but you don't need. You make them, you put them in the fridge, you eat them within a month to 2 months. You're not sealing them. You're not trying to put them on the shelf to last all winter long.
And yet the acidity keeps them fresh.
Yeah. Sure. And exactly. Refrigerator pickle should be consumed
within 30 days to
in a much smaller window.
So, my mom, and my folks are in their 80s, and I don't know why she decided she needed to do 2 batches of refrigerated pickles, but now we have 2 big ice cream pails of refrigerated pickles at home that they need to eat here, quite soon.
So that's a good question, too. It brings up a good question, too. Can, refrigerator pickles, you're using a vinegar, sugar brine in there. Can you put that's safe in a plastic?
Yeah. Make sure it's a food-grade plastic.
Okay.
So, ice cream pails work great because you buy ice cream in them, they're already a food-grade plastic.
Yeah.
So make sure you're using a food-grade plastic for anything that you plan on using food in.
Okay. So even Tupperware, things like that, are those
are all food-grade.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about this discussion is we can have so much confidence in this information because it's tested and
scientifically
science-based.
tested. Yes, exactly.
And so we can have so much confidence in it versus something that you see on Facebook.
And it worked. Someone can say it worked for me. And that person may have gotten lucky. But
so that's a good comment. So, they're always doing research and updating information. And so, one of the sources we recommend is obviously research universities or NDSU extension publications because they're all up to date. But Ball Blue Book is also a good resource, but they just updated there. So there's a brand new Ball Blue Book out this year.
They have Ball, the canning supply company?
So it's called Ball Blue Book, and it's, they've gone back for probably 100 years, but make sure you have a new one that's 2024. Maybe it's 2023. I don't know what the exact date on it. And get rid of all those other ones that are, say, 1950 on there, 1960 on there, even, 2012, because the recommendations have changed because research changes all the time. So make sure you're using up-to-date information when you are canning any product, not just pickles, but any product. And don't go to the old church cookbooks or your mom's recipe container, your grandma's recipe container, and your favorite line, well, I've never gotten sick before. Well, you've probably been lucky.
Right.
That's a good point, Rita, because I've inherited some cookbooks from my mother and grandmother. And when I've looked back at some of my grandmother's books on how to can, it's frightening. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that they did, and it is. They apparently were lucky. But there maybe were cases of botulism and death attributed to those.
We always say that a lot of times past generations had a lot of upset stomachs or a 24-hour flu. And we think that might been a foodborne illness.
It would make sense.
Yeah, in place of the flu bug because of the way they were handling food and not preserving it with anything that they knew of at the time. They did the best that they could do at the time with the information they had. And so one of my questions last year, I got this lady had bought cucumbers at the farmer's market and had put 83 quarts of jars, her cucumbers in there and her brine in them and put them in the garage overnight because she didn't have time to process them. Ooh. And she called the next morning and they all had a white foam on them. And she wanted me to know how to get rid of that foam. And it's they're spoiling.
Dumping them.
You're dumping them. And
that's
she's
how you get rid of them.
And she said, do you know how much time that was and how much money? I said, I do realize that, but there's nothing you can do to save your cucumbers or your pickles at this time. So my point is, don't buy too much and try to do too much. You got to do it the amount you can do at the time you're doing it.
Right.
And we always say it's best to pick your cucumbers or your tomatoes, your beans, and process them within 24 hours because that's going to be the freshest product. Because you can't take a product that's not nice and think you're going to have a nice product. So your product's going to turn out as with what you start with.
Sure. So shriveled old cucumbers aren't going to get any better.
They're not going to give you a nice pickle, Don.
Right.
They're going to give you a shriveled old pickle. So within 24 hours, you want to process those.
And I'm sure you say the same thing like with tomatoes that might have blemishes or some spotting, bacterial spots on and fungus type spots. I'm sure the same thing holds true with the tomato fruit.
We tell you to eat those and not process them.
Sure, cut away the
we don't want
bad
you to
part and just
preserve
eat
anything that has from a dead or diseased vine. And then when the frost hits, nothing from a frost-killed vine as well. Because, again, we don't know what that bacteria is, so we don't know if it's going to get killed or destroyed. So can't use anything from a diseased vine or that has a blemish on them, but they're fine for eating, for cutting them away.
You talked about, that you want to process these foods in 24 hours after you pick them to preserve their flavor. Just out of curiosity, as somebody who's pickled for a long time, how, if you pull out a jar of tomatoes in January, just give me an idea, like how, because you go to a store, you go to a grocery store and you buy a tomato in January and you could tell that's not a real fresh tomato. That's, it's something else. I mean, it is a tomato, but it's still. How fresh does it taste? Coming, if you've jarred them successfully, if you've jarred tomatoes successfully, how fresh does it taste?
So with your tomatoes, it's not going to taste like a fresh tomato because what you're processing is either a salsa or a juice or a crushed tomato that you're going to put in a product.
Or tomato sauce.
Or tomato sauce that you're going to use a product. Yep. But if you had a good quality tomato and you process it early, it should still have a really nice flavor to it. And again, it depends on if you put salt in it or any of that product too, but it should be fine for with a good flavor and consistency. If, in all honesty, and everyone's going to say, there's no way I have enough tomatoes in 24 hours. I understand that. So they do sit there probably for a week until you get enough tomatoes to make a canner full.
Yeah.
Because not everyone has 29 plants or 39 plants. My mom and dad have 4 plants at their house, right? So it's going to take us, well, actually, there's lots of tomatoes on their plants right now. So it might take 1 week to get enough tomatoes to do a canner of like whole tomatoes. And so we can hold tomatoes at home because that's the only way you can make chili. Yep. You have to have home canned tomatoes. You can't have the store-bought ones.
Well, tomatoes do hold their quality quite nicely off the vine. Mm-hmm. So it gives you some time because we've run into the same thing. Sometimes just in one picking, you don't get enough. So you maybe have to do a couple of pickings, but they do hold their quality, unlike things like cucumbers and things and other vegetables.
Don't put them in the refrigerator for tomatoes.
Good point.
Just let them sit on your cupboard or...
Yeah, it's like this is not necessarily pickling, but if you slice a tomato, you pick a garden tomato, you slice it for a sandwich that you're having that afternoon, what's the best way to store a half of a tomato?
Well, actually, at that point, you probably will want to put it in the fridge because you have sliced it and you don't know if your utensil was totally clean. Yeah. So there could be some kind of bacteria or something on that. But normally, you do not store tomatoes in a refrigerator.
Right, whole tomatoes. Yeah.
Because tomatoes are a warm season plant, warm season crop. And if you take that fruit and stick it in a refrigerator, that tomato just says, wow, I'm not in the tropics any longer. And it changes the flavor and the texture. And they're just, it does totally change that tomato by chilling.
The other product that a lot of people, this is my second also question. Actually, this is probably my number one question. I have the favorite recipe for a salsa that I have designed myself. How do I process it? And it's like, freeze it. And they no, we want to put it in jars and put it on the shelf. I'm sorry, but I can't tell you because I don't know the proportion of peppers, onions, garlics to tomatoes and vinegar, which is very important because you have to have the right pH to be able to hot water bath that, right? So I can't tell you, go ahead and have 3 cups of tomatoes to a cup of peppers, and it's a safe product. There's no way I can say that.
So if they've taken, if they've taken a kind of a recipe and kind of tweaked it the way they like and kind of think
they're
they
going
developed
off the cuff.
Put a little of this, put a little more of this in, a little less of that, so that they kind of think that they're coming up with a really good recipe. So that's not good.
So I tell them the only safe recommendation I can give them is to freeze that product.
Sure.
So, one thing I can tell you, you can change in a recipe is the type of peppers. Because a lot of people want a hotter salsa and some want milder salsa. So if the recipe calls for 1 cup of peppers, I don't care what kind of pepper you have in that, as long as it's not more than 1 cup.
Yeah.
So if you want a really hot pepper, just do a cup of ghost peppers, and then you won't have any friends left after eating that.
If you're even still alive.
Right. So what you can change the type of pepper, but not the amount in salsa if you have a tested recipe. That's the only alteration you can make.
So you mentioned the proportion of the pepper to the tomato. Now, why is that proportion important?
Well, peppers and onions and celeries are pH different than the tomatoes. So the peppers and tomatoes and salsa in that, those are normally products that we need to pressure can.
Sure.
But
so I
we're
suppose
putting
they're
with
not
the
as
acidic,
acid.
yeah,
Sure.
so we're putting with the acidic tomatoes and vinegar. So they have proportionate, so we still get that safe pH of 4.6.
Sure. So by putting in too much peppers, you'd be lowering the acidity. So
Right.
then you could create a non-safe product. Sure.
That's correct.
And people they could make a salsa and just put it in the fridge if they were going to eat it within, what did you say, 30 days?
Well,
Probably less.
Fresh, we say 2 weeks. So
2 weeks, okay.
Or so. But you can freeze it. And a lot of people don't have freezer space. And they say, oh, my tomato salsa or whatever gets runny. And it probably does get more liquid in it when you freeze it. But just stir it up and it won't be a thick salsa like sometimes people make.
It's interesting that freezing keeps it safe, whereas canning it in a jar would be unsafe.
Yeah, and so the difference there is because by canning it in a jar, you're putting it into this unsafe conditions of time, temperature.
Sure, and it's going to sit at room temperature.
Right, and
sure.
so if you give the like your beans and peas and stuff, if you give them the wrong time and temperature, that's when the bacteria grows and multiplies, and that's what makes you sick.
Sure, because most of us, after we can like salsa, it sits like in the pantry or on a shelf somewhere. And so it's at a room temperature that I suppose if it's not processed properly at room temperature, those bacteria could grow and
that's why
problems.
You have to have the right balance of the acid.
Sure.
All right, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, more with Rita Ussatis and pickling and canning our produce from the garden.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back with Rita Ussatis from NDSU Extension, and you are pickling. Can we say expert?
No, I'm not an expert.
Okay.
Because
she is.
Well, this is coming from Don, who doesn't like being called a gardening expert.
Right.
Take all that with.
But the recommendations coming
right.
out of Rita and NDSU Extension
wealth of knowledge,
give a person
certainly.
such confidence
Yeah.
that when following those, you're going to be doing things safely.
So we're talking pickling today. We talked a lot about pickling cucumbers and tomatoes. But one thing is that when you're prepping, before you start with that, because you said a lot of times when you get into pickling, you just gotta kind of run through the process. You want to get it all done in a relatively short order of time so that things aren't sitting out. But what do you need to do to prep the vegetables after you pick them, between picking them and putting them in the jar and the solution over them?
So it depends on the recipe you're making, but you always need to cut off the blossom end of your cucumber and the stem end, right? Because you don't want those in any kind of pickle, right? But you need to wash them. And it's washing with this plain water. I know there's a lot of products out there that are called vegetable washes, and so you don't need to use them. It's just plain cold water. And then depends on the pickle you're making. Some of them you have to let them dry before you put them in the jar with the brine. And some of the recipes, you have to make the brine ahead of time and let it cool down because you don't want to put the hot liquid on the cucumber. And refrigerator pickles, I mean, that they take a lot of time because you got to cut all those little slices. And so that takes a lot of time. And so there's some machines out there that like cucumber slicers and stuff go really fast too. And so they're kind of fun to use if you want to. And
we should say with all these recipes on the NDSU Extension site, there are links, or do you post a lot of these recipes? Or
so if you actually Google NDSU Extension food preservation publications, it should bring you to a whole list of our webpage. And then on the left side of the webpage, it actually goes into like fruits and fruit products, jams and jellies, tomatoes, salsa, pickles, vegetables, and meat. Dehydrating, freezing. So, depends on whatever method you want to do.
Right.
And then once you hit like the tomato one, then it will break it down into like tomatoes, salsa. It then breaks it down even more. And then within the publication, there's like tomato sauce, crushed tomatoes, whole tomatoes. And I didn't bring this up earlier, but it depends on where you live too, how long you process them. Like right in
the elevation?
The elevation.
Oh, sure.
And our elevation changes kind of out at Castleton.
Really?
Yes. And then we go up to another elevation.
Does that affect the
processing
timing, I suppose the pressure or something?
Yeah. So
interesting.
So when people call, I ask where you live, people go, why do you need to know where I live? Well, I need to know if you're in Fargo, North Dakota, or if you're in Valley City, North Dakota, or if you're calling from Dickinson, North Dakota, because the processing time will change probably 5 minutes between each one of those. So
that's really interesting. I did not even think about that.
Yeah.
You hear about that, like with the altitude will affect the amount of cooking time, but this is kind of the same thing.
That's fascinating.
Same thing. We were talking about prepping of pickles, right? For tomatoes, all our recipes call you for skinning your tomato.
Okay.
And skinning means that you take your tomato, you can do it two ways. Most people cut off the blossom end before you do this, but you bring a kettle of water to boil, you drop your tomato in there till your tomato splits. And if they're ripe, it will split within 30 seconds. If they're not ripe, sometimes it's 5 minutes. Then you drop them right into cold water and the skin comes right off them.
See, that's my job when Mary and I are canning. I'm the person that gets the tomatoes out of the hot boiling water and gets them over to the sink in cold water.
And then the skin just slides right off.
It does.
Right.
And then you can put them in the jars, then get the solution.
Right. Depends on what you're making. Sometimes you have to cut them up. Depends on if you're doing whole tomatoes or half tomatoes or quarter tomatoes, or if you're making juice. But you always want to take the skin off your tomato before you do something with it.
I've got a question. When you're filling your quart jars with the tomatoes, how full onto the jar do you do that?
So you're asking about headspace, and headspace it varies again on what product you're making. So it could be an inch, a half inch, or a quarter inch. And everyone says, "Oh, I need a ruler or whatever." Well, there's a tool out there you can buy and waste $2. But on the jar rim, right, the very bottom,
because there's kind of the shoulders of the jar.
That's an inch.
I call them.
And then the rim that you screw your band on.
Yep.
The next one's a half inch, and the top one's a quarter inch. So your jars are actually the rim.
Kind of measured for us.
Measures for us, so you don't have to spend money on the special tool.
Is that a standard industry-wide? Or because...
Yeah, on all the jars. And you need to use canning jars. You can't reuse,
old Prego jars,
none of those.
None of those. Those are not meant
glass, no plastic.
No plastic. So those glass, everyone thinks you can reuse those Prego or...
Yeah, tomato jars.
Yeah, but you can't. You have to have actual canning jars.
And so this was, we talked about this a little bit, but that really the amount of canning has really boomed since 2020 and COVID and the pandemic, right?
When I started Extension a few years ago, it was huge. Everyone did it because everyone had big gardens on their farms. And then in the late 90s, 2000, it was like no one was doing it anymore. It was like a lost art.
Yeah.
And then since 2020, it has just blossomed again because everyone wants to know where their food's coming from. They want natural foods. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are raising their own gardens and preserving their own food because they want to know where their food's coming from.
And so there's a big demand for information on home canning and processing. Right.
And again, make sure when you're doing that, you're using a reliable source. And, NDSU Extension has reliable information on there. If though you can't find the recipe you want, you can always Google National Food Preservation website, and that's from the University of Georgia. And they're going to have some of those other recipes, and that's where all our research is done, is actually down there too.
So if somebody had family from another part of the country, somebody from Georgia, and they came up to Fargo and they brought something. They brought something that we don't normally have up here, and they wanted to learn how to can that, how to pickle that. Then they would look at
I would go to the National Food Preservation website.
Okay.
You could call us too, because I actually have a lot of those recipes in my office, because I just got a new cookbook from there with all the new recommendations for all those other products, because this is a nationwide research center. So the book is probably 3 inches thick. So I have a lot of these recipes that you don't think of up here.
Yeah. But I think that's something now too. That when we had Jack on talking about the growth of community gardens, where you're getting people who are not from this area, who are coming from all around the world, and they're bringing in some of their foods that will grow. And you probably are seeing more of that too.
We are. With some of those foods, that we still don't have recommendations for some of that. So a lot of that time is we recommend just freezing it, or even if it could be dehydrated.
Yep.
We still have some products we don't know how to safely preserve for the winter months either.
Yeah.
So,
one comment you made, Rita, that I've been smiling about the whole program is you mentioned that some people are kind of hesitant to pressure can.
Right.
And, it's interesting. I grew up, my mom did all of hers pressure can, but I remember as kids, we were watching that pressure can, or this big equipment with the gauge up on the top, thinking, wow, is that thing going to blow? And it never did.
No.
Mom's material always came out so safe and wonderful. So
I think my mom
so
used
I
that.
I learned how easy it is to pressure can.
I think my mom used that as an opportunity to clear the house out so that nobody bothered her, just to give herself a little bit more space so that she could relax and do things in her time and not have kids hanging around.
So let's talk about those pressure canners. If
Yes.
you have a dial gauge, you need to have that dial gauge checked to make sure the pressure, that your gauge is still working. So it's very important that you have that correct gauge. So we do that at our office free of charge. We actually have a pressure gauge tester, and I know mine's up to date because I just sent it in and got mine recalibrated. So mine's up to date and accurate. So you just simply bring me your gauge.
Okay.
Take it off the cover, bring your gauge in.
They don't need to bring in the whole pot.
Nope, just the gauge. And we can test to make sure it's still reading accurately.
That's great.
So,
and for those that are in other areas other than Cass County, many
check with your
university extension offices might have that capacity.
I'm going to
also.
say in North Dakota, we do that. Our friends across the river do not.
Okay.
And so, but in most of the counties in North Dakota do that. So make sure that they're doing that. And I don't recommend products, but there's a couple new products out there that are just, and Don saw this because I got them in the office.
We bought one.
Okay.
We have an electric hot water bath canner and an electric pressure canner.
Okay.
And they are so smooth. It takes out the guesswork of making sure that, like for a hot water bath, that your water's boiling and stay consistent boil like it's supposed to. This times it and keeps it there, and it beeps at you when you're supposed to make a change. And same with the electric pressure canner. It brings the pressure up and it starts timing at the exact pressure you want it at. And they're very, very easy to use products because I got mine in March. So we were making salsa in our office in March because I had to try it out. And so
see, the reason I bought it was Mary and I have a glass top stove, and you're not supposed to do water bath.
Well, actually, you're not supposed to can on a glass top stove, hot water bath or pressure can.
That's a lot of weight on that glass top
sure.
stove.
And it's not because of the safe product. You could crack your glass top.
You could crack your glass top.
Okay.
So these units that Rita got for demo, and I bought one, they are a self-standing unit. They don't go on the stove. They're self-standing over on a
cupboard.
Countertop,
Yep.
and you can it on that in that self-standing unit. So I don't have to worry about cracking our glass top stove, which we should not have been doing.
Right.
And the other thing that's really good about those, I mean, if you ever lifted a canner, you know how heavy they
Yeah,
are,
they
right?
are.
So this electric one, there's actually a spigot, so you just drain the water. You set it by the sink, and you just turn the spigot on and drains the hot water down the
But
sink.
that was my job, lifting that big heavy container over to the sink and pouring and trying not to burn myself.
You know, Don, you have an injured shoulder, so that you'll really appreciate it this year when you don't have to lift that.
So talk about improved technology.
And so some of us are really kind of vertically challenged. So to lift this big thing off the stove and move it was very difficult for me. And so this is, I really like this product, and they're available. on the internet. But so I won't give a brand name or anything, but
there are things that people can look for if they want to. And one of the big product that you need is a jar. Like you said, you need a food safe jar, a canning jar. And during 2020, during the pandemic, those were really hard to come by. Have we seen, is there a rebound?
Yeah, there's no product shortage out there for jars or lids. The only thing I want to say about lids, because this has really changed over the time, you usually used to boil your lids and then you put them on and then you get the strongest person in your house to turn the band on. And now you just wash your lids and you put them on finger tight with the band.
Okay.
So a lot of times when the jars don't seal, people have turned the bands on too tight. You have broken the sealant, or you've boiled them still and you've broken the sealant. And so make sure when you're looking at your lids that you're following the manufacturer instructions on what they say, how to prepare them. If it's to wash them or wash them in warm water, and then it's always just finger tight. I don't think we have the problem like we used to when you would find lids like in your grandma's house when you're cleaning your grandma's house, because when we had a shortage, everyone was going through everybody's house, finding whatever lids they could be. So I think all those lids that had other directions are all gone now, because like I said, in 2020, everyone was trying to find lids wherever they could find them.
And the newer lids, you can reuse those?
No.
They are one and done?
They're one and done.
Yeah.
There is some products out there that are reusable lids. Again, we don't have a lot of research on them at this point, but the latest research that you could find would be on the National Food Preservation website if they have anything on them right now. So the lids right now are just one and done.
But the bands you can use
again. Bands you can reuse and reuse.
How long do you leave the bands on?
24 hours.
After the jars come out of the processor.
So once you take the product out of your processor, you put them on the counter in a draft-free area, put a towel over them, and you leave them undisturbed for 24 hours. At 24 hours, if they seal, great, take the lid off, wash them, date them, put them away. If they haven't sealed, you can reprocess them or put them in the fridge and reuse them. But
I love that, checking them to see that they've sealed.
See if they're digging,
I love
right?
that, yeah.
But take the bands off. And the purpose of the bands is because if you leave them on, sometimes they rust.
Oh, okay.
We've done that.
Okay.
And they've rusted on.
Yeah. And so you don't need them. The only purpose of the band is to keep the lid on during the processing.
It's a time. It's only for a period of time.
So take those bands off. And then when you've done all your canning, we really hope you use it within 1 year.
Yep.
That's what we recommend. We get people that have cleaned out old houses and they find products from 20, 30 years ago. And if you find that, we have a safe procedure on how to get rid of that. You can't just totally destroy it or just throw it away. Sometimes you need to do some preparation with that or bury it or something.
No, why is that?
Oh, because we don't know what enzymes are in there.
Good point.
If there's a bacteria in there, like if botulinum's in there, it could kill you with one drop. I mean,
wow.
so yeah, we have some safe procedures.
I could see that, a 30-year-old that you find in grandma's house when you're cleaning it out, a 30-year-old thing of tomatoes.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's more the carrots and peas and stuff that we're worried about, those products.
But low acid.
So, you can't just say just dump them out, because if you dump them in the garbage, someone else could touch them.
Monkey with them, and
So we have procedures for that too.
What other questions do you get about this time of the year about canning? What are some of the other things that people should know?
Oh, we get everything. I mean, you kind of name it. So we kind of get it because they've been on the internet and they've found the latest research, or non-research, the latest methods out there. But again, we get most of them like how long to process green beans in a method that's not recommended. We also get I get lots of salsa, lots of cucumber pickling questions. And then like, why didn't my jar seal? And so we have a whole set of questions we'll ask. Well, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? A lot of people take your jar out of the canner, and you wipe it off because you want the liquid off, or you've turned it to dump the water off. When you take it out of the canner, you bring it straight up and you set it down. Let the liquid sit there. Don't dump it to the side to get the liquid off. Don't wipe it off because that disturbs the seal.
Just
leave it there.
Up on the top.
Don, just leave it there. Don't touch it.
Yep, I believe it. You see, I'm learning lots.
So there's lots of little methods, but we have all those simple directions on the 12 steps to water bathing. We have a publication on that as well. And so we have lots of easy directions to follow. What I always say is just call me. Don't feel like, and I always get, my friends wanted me to call you. I'm pretty sure your friend didn't want you to call, but you didn't want to admit that you did asking for my friend, or I'm fighting with my sister, which could probably be a true question. But, but it's like, just ask the question. We don't judge anybody. We just want to make sure you're doing a safe product so you're not getting sick or making anyone else sick. So,
when you're just talking about that, about pulling, when you pull the can out of the bath, you see there are kind of canning tongs, right? That'll pick it up. How is that something that people should invest in?
Yeah.
Because I would imagine if you go in there with your bare hand, you're going to burn yourself.
So remember, it's boiling water, right? So you're going to want to use the correct equipment for canning, and they're jar lifters. That's what they're called.
Okay.
And we invested in one. Yeah. Wonderful.
I have one that I didn't invest in. I got it free, and it's just the simplest thing. It doesn't have the fancy handle or rubber, but it works the best because it grips the rim of the jar just really tight. Sometimes the more expensive or bigger or bulkier, you don't really need all that. You need one that's just going to grip the jar really good at the neck of the jar, so you can lift it and set it down. So you use that several times during canning, like when you're sterilizing your jars. And that's the other question I get a lot is about sterilizing jars. You can wash your jars in the dishwasher and keep them hot.
Okay.
And, otherwise the other method is to put them in the boiling water and steam them for 10 minutes.
Okay.
And but it's safe to sterilize your jars in the dishwasher and keep them hot.
All right.
So there's just so much, but just feel free to call me at the extension office. That's the Cass County Extension Office, and ask the questions. We don't judge people. We will try to give you the best answer we can get. Sometimes, actually, even though I've done this for years, takes me time to look up the answer because I've never heard of what you've been doing or how you did it. So I'm not just going to give you an answer unless I know it's a correct answer.
What's the best number to call?
Our extension office number is 701-241-5700. And that's the best number to call to ask the questions. And they'll transfer the phone message to me. So
and you said also too, if people have a kind of a basic question or if they're looking for particular recipes, they can look up the extension website, Google the extension website.
Right. It's the Google NDSU Extension Food Preservation website. That's the easiest way in place of trying to give you a whole address that's like 39 letters long.
Slashes, backbashes.
So just Google that. And again, if you have something that's from another area of the States, I would actually Google the National Food Preservation website.
Don, what will you be canning this year?
Oh, tomatoes for sure. Lots and lots of tomatoes. And it's interesting, as we were discussing here, I was thinking, of course, I lead a simple life, but one of life's greatest pleasures is looking at pantry shelves lined with jars of pickles and tomatoes and everything else. It is just amazing. When my mom did lots and lots of canning, and that always impressed me. You had a winter's food supply right there, and it was all homegrown, fresh, nutritious. And gosh, so this has been a great discussion.
Yeah. So again, feel free to reach out to us and, have a good canning season.
Can put you on the spot here. What's your favorite thing to can or eat canned? What's
salsa.
What's the one thing? Yeah. So what do you put in your salsa?
Well, I shouldn't really say this, but I use the real easy method.
Okay.
There's some product out there that
tried and true. There's no problem with that.
It's a dried. Your vegetables are dehydrated.
Okay.
They're packages, and you just add your tomatoes and vinegar to that, and you cook it down and process it. And
How many jars will you do a year?
Depends on how many family members need it during the year.
How many deserve it?
How many get it this year? We are actually out of salsa at our family this year. Last year, apparently, we didn't can as much as I thought we did. So we are actually all out. And so depends on the tomato crop or, because we have about 3 gardens between my mom and dad, my sister, and my niece. And so I would say we'd probably do like 45 jars maybe of salsa or so. And the other product we all have to have is the whole tomatoes. so we can make chili.
I was going to say, that's my favorite. That's where most of ours go, are the quarts of whole tomatoes that end up in chili. And both
Don,
Rita
it's
and
not chili season yet.
Rita
so.
and my wife both tell me you can't have chili during the summertime. So I look forward to fall and winter because apparently that's chili season.
Yeah.
We're getting close.
That's
the thing that I really like about canning too, is that because it can be a big operation, it can bring families together. It could become a family event. It could become a neighborhood event or friends together. And it's that communal, another aspect of the communal aspect of food. I said aspect twice, but it's another element of that food is sharing, and sharing what you've grown or what you've canned. It's really kind of a wonderful thing.
Yeah, great discussion. Thanks, Rita, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this has been great.
So any kind of upcoming events, Extension's always great for having events, community events that are out to educate. Anything coming up on your horizon?
Well, yes. On Monday, August 19th at 4:30 in the evening, I'm doing a facts and myths of food preservation bingo lesson at the Carlson Library in South Fargo. And then I'm doing the same lesson on Friday, the 23rd at 11 o'clock in the morning at the downtown library.
Bingo, that sounds fun.
Yeah, so it's going to be more like questions and answers about all the hot topics, kind of like we talked about today. So the August 19th or the 23rd working with the Fargo Library.
Okay, so people can go on the library website and look for those, or will those be on the Extension website too?
I haven't put them there yet, but I probably should. So,
okay.
Yes.
Well, that'd be great. All right, Dawn, if people have questions about their garden, they want to send you what kind of vegetables they should grow to can, what's the best way to reach you?
Any questions, give me an email, donald.kinsler, spelled Kinzler, at ndsu.edu. And it's always great to hear from listeners.
All right, well, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you next week.
Have a great week, everyone.